Christian. This is my guest, Judith. Excuse me, a little summer cough.
Yeah, just want to say that science has proven that women are actually better at mansplaining. So explain that.
Yes. We want. She will be doing the mansplaining today. Obviously, that's a provocative title to get people to come and click and join on us. But we're common people. We're non-elites. We're talking about important issues today. I want to introduce our guest here. This is Judith's first time. She's a longtime friend of mine. Generally a person of the one of my friends on the left. I'm generally more conservative, generally a Republican person, but we've had many discussions over the years and still have maintained amicable things.
One way or another, yeah.
Yes. She thinks she's here to discuss politics and justice and social things, but really I'm here to talk sports. All right. Judy went to North Carolina.
Yep.
And she can I'll let her introduce herself a little bit more, but studied classics. I went North Carolina at Chapel Hill is one of the more liberal universities out there by reputation. She can speak more. Yeah. She can speak more to that when she talks about her experience. I went to Brigham Young University, which is one of the more conservative universities out there by reputation. And just this last year, the top basketball recruit in the country, since LeBron James chose BYU over North Carolina for purely basketball reasons. So
I'll take your word for that, I guess.
Oh, okay.
All right. I'm not even that pro. I should be. Yeah.
We're not really talking sports, but that's just my little strut that I feel a little bit about when it comes to North Carolina and BYU right now. They are going to play an exhibition game, a basketball game earlier in the year. Won't be for anything official, but thought it was kind of funny. All right. So, Judy, if you would introduce yourself a little bit and just sort of your background and your what do you think people to this channel might appreciate to know about you?
So I did attend UNC at Chapel Hill. I was like very, very far to the left at the time when I did, and I will say it was like within a couple of weeks of starting to attend, it just like kind of clicked for me. I was even I had been volunteering at a very far left bookstore for a year ahead of that, and even then I was still like, oh well, I'm an environmentalist. But after like starting at UNC, I was like, yeah, like right to the rallies, right to the protests. So then real life kind of hits you, I guess. And so I went like back and forth. I guess like it's funny, like I have a graduate degree. I don't really use it, but so I'm not sure like where that puts me in like not being elite, but I did like learn a lot of far left theory, and then I also like spent a lot of time volunteering in communities and realized like well, we're learning all this like far left theory, but like the people I'm volunteering with, like the actual people coming to use the services are like very socially conservative people. So I had to like kind of get that together in my head. But, you just kind of go along with the New York Times, NPR kind of bubble for a while, and you're like, okay, well, everybody's saying Trump's a fascist. Well, he must be, because that's the news, and they report it correctly. And so, and I didn't realize it was like kind of, I guess I'll say, losing touch with the reality of a lot of forces behind what was really happening. And so then at a certain point, I was like none of this is making sense anymore. Yeah. I guess. And I was like, this like can't be true. Like what they're saying about these people can't be true. Like everybody like doesn't fit into a box so easily. And I'm like a little ashamed to say, like, it took me until I feel like my 40s to be like a critical thinker, despite my like fine university education and all. So but like otherwise, like I did study classical civilization and have an interest in world history, just like really far back, really far forward. So, that helps too.
Yeah. So I imagine we both read Plato's Republic. I read it at the most conservative university. You read it at the most liberal university.
I translated it. Come on.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Out of Greek, man.
Yes, out of Greek. So yeah. So like I would imagine the discussions we had about that were very different. Right. For us, like where you stand on the Philosopher Kings. Right. For us, his idea of dissolving the families and all these things were like very very foreign to obviously a very conservative mindset. But I've had an appreciation with that, but kind of not to the level you had. But yeah, so you've been around a lot of leftist or organizations, so you understand them. So she's going to bring that perspective to our discussion today. So what we've talked about right at the topic is the first thing we're going to talk about, and we'll go through some different things, is we want to talk about how whether it's real or perceived, when there's a two-tier justice in our from our government to its citizens, what effect that creates, and what that effect that's created now when people perceive that there's a rule for one group of people, but they're treated differently, but the laws are applied differently to another group of people. This is there have been a couple examples that have been very strongly in the news this week about it. And I shared those with Judy. One, essentially some selective prosecutions where some people committed obvious felonies on camera against people for purely and assaulted people purely because their ideas were different from their ideas. That was the only justification or motive for why they enacted physical violence against them. Then there were criminal charges filed, and then those criminal charges were ultimately dropped because the prosecutor was happened to politically agree more with the ideas of the person doing the assaulting, right? And so the perception becomes then that the laws apply differently to people of different groups. And my hypothesis is that's one of the most poisonous things that a government can do, short of outright corruption, politicians being in it to enrich themselves, is create an environment where people don't feel like that they are equal before the law. Tell me, even in classical, I would say, in Rome, Greece, Western history, is that something that they strive for? Or was it always sort of elites had one thing and normal people, obviously slaves, but as far as citizens go, was there always a strive classically to have everybody be equal before the law?
Okay, so you're asking if that's the case, that classically speaking, like people were equal before the law. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble still with it.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, that's what I would say. Is that a foundation of our Western society that when it comes, if we're ruled by law, like we're a republic, modeled very loosely after the Roman Republic, but that we should be ruled by laws and not by.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I mean, it's like essentially the case that like that's at least what the founding fathers had in mind, and that's at least what they were emulating, like with their throwbacks to Rome and Greece and stuff like that. But I guess the argument a lot of so I'll say like my experience, like I've known people close to me in the criminal justice system, and my experience with it is that there is always a political element in it. So like even when like I knew somebody who was in a case like 20 years ago or something now, 25 years ago, and like it was very much like our lawyers even were telling us like it is very much like politically driven why this case is being prosecuted in this particular way. So I think that my experience with that like made me realize that there's probably always a political element to it, and laws are like you can write them down, but it always takes interpretation. And so, and I think, like, I'll just say the argument about, like, whether laws should be applied equally, like, I would guess that, like, I don't know a whole lot about, like, these current cases, but I would guess that the argument that, like, these particular judges or whatever, like, juries are using or whatever, is that, like, the law is never equally applied, and so it is our job to, like, tip the scale, put the finger on the scale in the direction we think it should go. So it's, I think there's, like, an element of rejection of even the premise that laws apply equally to anybody.
I can see that. So if we accept, let's just accept as a matter of just fact that there is politics in prosecutions and checking what to prosecute, how to prosecute a case. There's going to be politics involved, as district attorneys are elected and political figures, right? But so even a bad district attorney can still have a good bring forward a good case, and even an honest district attorney can bring forward a bad case or a weak case, right? So the cases, I guess, have to be, and that's for the judge to decide on their merits.
Standard. Yeah.
Right. I think part of the thing that people have seen, right, when cases are completely dropped and not enforced, and doesn't even get to the point where a judge or a jury is deciding, okay, this situation decides I put my thumb on the scale this way or not, but a political person decides whether or not to. Now, just as a matter of openness and transparency, I don't agree with Trump's current prosecution of James Comey. Even though I don't like James Comey, I think this is a fairly naked and unjustified prosecution. Sort of here's this person, find something that he did, rather than in the course of doing work, seeing, hey, this is something that we found that was a serious violation and we need to prosecute it. And so that type of political targeting of cases, which was done to Trump, he was harassed with the criminal justice system. And,
lawfare. Yeah.
He's trying to, he's saying turn him out as fair play. And I understand the sentiment, but I feel it's un-American, and I hope that a judge, as soon as he gets a chance to see it, will dismiss the case, and we can move on, and that they can realize and when that comes back, that we can set a new precedent that these types of things don't need to be a part to have such naked political prosecutions. Here's one example. I'd like your opinion on this. And in Great Britain, I know you haven't been following Great Britain a lot, but they've been having problems with clashes between immigrants, the number of immigrants. And what people have really seen is that, and they call it a two-tier tier, is that since the Labor Department has been in charge, there seems to be the justice system is applied to immigrants differently, much differently than native Brits. And native Brits are held to a higher standard, and not just that the laws are more enforced to them, but that their sentences are harsher. Excuse me. And that it's sort of a soft racism of low expectations. This is sort of the immigrants are not expected to live up to Western standards, right? When they come to live in the West, of course they can't, and so we shouldn't prosecute them. But when somebody who's lived here and grown up in this does something, we throw the book at them. One of the clear examples was a woman named Lisa Connolly. So there was an attack. Some children were attacked in Southport and murdered. It was a very there were a lot of protests about it, a big thing. And Lisa was very emotional about it. She had experienced some violence in her family. And so she made a social media post that was very aggressive and about, kind of said that they should send all immigrants back. It was up for a couple of hours, and then she kind of regretted it and took it down. Okay. Police came and arrested her just for posting that social media thing. Now her attorney said, well, we have freedom of speech. This can go nothing. Just plead guilty. Yes, you did the post, and they'll just, say don't do it again or something. Well, they threw the book at her when she pled guilty. She got 3 years in prison, right? Taken away from her children. All of this for a social media post. Now, for a crime that person's still in jail, nobody disputes happened or is emotional or things saying just for speech, but held to a standard very, very high as a British citizen to a standard they're not holding. And so, obviously, I'm not saying whether you agree or disagree with it, but when people have these very clear examples at it, how do you think that affects, I guess, the larger social structure, how people start feeling about their neighbors or the government? And do you feel like how can it be overcome? Like if our mutual goal is to live in peace with our neighbors, I feel like this type of thing makes it difficult.
Well, I'll say something about like immigration historically. I guess the United States is a nation that has like a very active history of immigration, and so the UK, to my knowledge, is not a country that is familiar with integration of immigrants.
Not in these
like
kind of
really,
numbers, not in these numbers.
yeah, and they do, like, I've seen like percentage type numbers and stuff, and I would say like probably for any society, that's a lot of foreign-born people that have to learn the customs of a place. And as far as like how I guess laws are applied, I guess I would say I have a preference for like one law for everybody. And I've heard a lot more actually about Canada and like two-tiered justice systems there with like people like somebody being killed by someone and like the trauma of like race being a factor in the sentencing and people feeling like really jilted there by the system for that reason. And all I can say is like I guess all I can say is that I've just heard about these things, and so it's always like I feel like there's like almost always a lot more nuance when you're looking up close at them, like when you know the person involved or when you like have seen like read the full transcript instead of just like the news highlights or something. So I guess I'm reluctant to comment on it, but I guess my point like that I will make is that I think civil liberties are really important, and I'm really happy that the United States has the First Amendment, protecting speech and protecting lawful gatherings, and the UK doesn't have that, Canada doesn't have that, and we see the repercussions of it with like people in power being able to decide, I'm going to allow this gathering, but not this gathering. I'm going to allow this speech, but not that speech. And I guess that is a whole different can of worms. Like, it's I feel like it should be speech should be a pretty permissible thing for most people, unless you're like literally saying you're out to commit acts of terrorism or something like that.
Or overthrow the government. And so what this has led to, this sort of I think that this two-tiered system makes people feel like that their elites have one system that they want, and that they sort of the working class or the lower classes are sort of talked down to or treated at a harsher level. And what we're getting at in Europe and to a lesser extent in the UK and the US, right? They want to ban. Europe is banning political parties. They just say these are right wing. You can't even run your candidates. Things like that is also a nature, right? That they get to decide what speech they feel like is beyond the pale, right? And then it's all, and then it's gone.
It's been for a long time.
And and so this is sort of the what we're concerned about is this feels like where leftism or progressivism in the United States was heading. And obviously with Trump's election, there's been a big correction from that, right? So we're not, but there's still lots of cities where there are very progressive leaders, a lot of states, very progressive leaders that are still trying this agenda, still pushing forward with things, and in spite of sort of a general sort of national consensus to try to swing back to the middle from the far left on these issues, because ultimately, like I feel like when you have a tier 2 justice system or a thing where the government is saying that we're going to ban this type of speech or this is inappropriate and people can't even talk, I think it creates more hostility, and people then feel like that they need to act out. They'll act out inappropriately. It feels very provocative that it's going to provoke the type of unrest we specifically don't want. Violent actions, protests that are not peaceful, but that are destructive.
I guess there's like a point to be made about having to push harder when the box is narrower or something like that. But I think also just from my standpoint too, like from my personal standpoint, I think I'd rather know who is an anti-Semite, who is a racist, who is a misogynist. I'd rather just you say it to me, and then I can say okay, I don't want to hang out with you, or I'm gonna keep my eye on you if I'm working with you or something. I would actually not prefer for these things to be said in private only to a certain secret coterie of people that then are just reinforcing each other. It's like a wound, you don't want to just cover it up and pretend it's not there. It's there, and you should clean it out, and you should let it heal.
Well, and I think that's a good point. I think to a lot of guys, people do suppress opinions and things. I think especially on the right, we've talked about 2022 might be sort of a peak woke, and where people who had conservative ideas were very reluctant to share them. I know I wasn't online talking about my political opinions in 2022. That felt very scary to do that. And now a couple of things I think have emboldened people who feel like that they need to reach out that have happened recently. One was the Charlie Kirk assassination, where people felt like if somebody's going to be assassinated just for talking, rather than allow that to intimidate me from not sharing my ideas, I should openly share them. And the Irina Zarutska slain in
Charlotte, yeah.
In Charlotte, has felt like people look, I've been quiet for so long, but if this is a result of me being quiet, it's sort of, you've seen sort of the silent majority, we would call it, not be so silent, sort of express mourning. I think there's a lot of mourning, there's a lot of pain there, but a lot of worry that for what they feel like should be common sense, that shouldn't be political. It shouldn't be a matter of if somebody's an unstable or career criminal with a clear history like Irina's killer. I don't want to use his name. To the
I guess
all
we'd
the
have
warning
to say
signs were
alleged
there
anyway, at this point, right?
What?
I guess we'd have to say alleged at this point anyway, right?
Yes, alleged assailant, accused assailant, but that the one of the primary reasons why we have governments, why we come to live together in cities, is that we want the government to, if they're going to provide a public good like public transit, that we be able to at minimum ride in a way where if we're not provocative, if we're not antagonizing anyone, we can ride in peace. That as a minimum standard.
Yeah, right. Well, you can't have people together if they can't expect to arrive alive. That used to be a slogan in Pennsylvania, when they lowered the speed limit to 55, it was arrive alive. So, but anyway.
Yeah, right. And I think that feels like the act, even though it was by somebody who had a career or had a life that was very troubled, acting out in a very violent and tragic way, it felt like an antisocial act because it now terrifies people to just live their lives, right? You said yourself, you lived in that neighborhood south of Charlotte. I went and visited you there. I've ridden on those trains with you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, like every day my husband used to ride on them. Yeah.
yeah, and how different that experience of living in that community is when you're constantly in a state of fear and the government isn't even trying to keep somebody of that level of danger um, out of the public for political reasons, right? Because he's seen as a potential political ally, or for identity reasons, it's too problematic, or we're looked bad upon them to come down and take down this person just because of an identity, even though clearly this person had diagnosed schizophrenia and a history of violence that would make him somebody who we would not, it was sort of, it feels preventable. It feels like it wasn't like out of the blue, like it was
Yeah, I
going to
think,
happen eventually.
well, I'll just say, like, a lot of what's called progressive, I'm just airing this opinion out loud, like,
Good.
for the first time. But anyway, a lot of what's called progressivism is in a way, it's sort of like a libertarianism, like the person themselves has to take care of themselves because the like if I guess it's like a confirmation of that horseshoe theory. I would say, like, the edges, the fringes are more like each other. Like we like, a libertarian might argue, like, everybody should just be armed and ready to defend themselves or something like that. And, like, you might say, well, since we don't want to, like, put someone in jail who might not deserve to be in jail, who might have, like, let's just air the argument, like who might have the deck stacked against them in some way, and so they're more likely to end up in jail for like reasons that really aren't about breaking the law, but more so about, like, social reasons or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't want to, like, put people who have that deck stacked against them. We don't want to, like, reinforce that. And so we're going to, like, be more lenient about prosecuting that kind of stuff. And there is a history of that too. So it's like you can understand where that's coming from. But anyway, so, like, but at a certain point, it's like, well, so I'm just going to, like, not be able, like, me walking down the street in, center city, Charlotte or whatever, they call it uptown. Like, if I'm not going to be able to, like, expect the police to help me if I'm assaulted or something, then I can, like, choose not to walk in uptown Charlotte, or I can choose to be armed and dangerous myself. And so I've been to, like, foreign countries where that's the case. Like, in Guatemala, I had a certain problem, and so I was being stalked, essentially. And so while I was being stalked, I suddenly realized there is nothing I can do about this, because the police do not care. This is not the kind of thing they're going to care about. They are not going to care about this foreign girl who is, like, just having, like, boy trouble, probably, as far as they would see it. And like it would take me probably, like, contacting the U.S. embassy, and then, like, what on earth would they do? And so I was like, boy, I am really just on my own with this. And, like, and that was a, like, really, like, funny feeling to have, because in the United States, like, if you felt that you were being stalked, you could at least say, like, put a what do they call it, the order
Restraining
to keep somebody
order.
away. Yeah, restraining order, like, if you had enough proof of it, which I don't think it even takes that much. It's just like, because, like, who does it hurt to have a restraining order against, like, against them? But so anyway, like, it's a little more like that feeling of, like, and I'll say it's not like, I know this particular case has, like, garnered a lot of attention because of the person's history and because of the history of why they haven't been detained more severely. But I will also say that it's a feeling I have anyway, because, like I feel like there's just a lot more people willing to like take problems into their own hands for like political, not for political reasons, just like people, like shootings have just gone way up all the time, and it's really like sometimes it's like lately it's been leftist violence, sometimes it's other like mixed political reasons or no political reason at all, or just some tiff, and it's like, you remember Columbine, like when that happened, that was like, oh my God, like what kind of world are we living in? And now it's like a daily occurrence that there's school shootings, and it's like people are just seeing schools as like shooting fish in a barrel or something like that, I feel like. So I guess like the political reasons behind it really, like behind why Irina's alleged killer like wasn't detained, like it really like puts those in stark terms of like should we be doing this? But it's not. But these are not the only reasons that people who are dangerous like are not. It's I feel like it's just like a social thing that we don't feel that strongly about it actually.
Well,
like, oh well, people are gonna cause violence. Oh well.
Yeah, it should be, well, yeah. So our culture, American culture, I will acknowledge, is more violent than other cultures, than Japan or Scandinavia or other cultures. I won't say that there are other cultures that are more violent than us, but there's a certain inherent amount of violence that we have in our culture. I'll accept that. But as when we come together to live in cities, if you're sort of a violent person, if you want to live as a hermit, go off in some place away from people, then that's the thing. But when you want to live together in cities and you want to ride public transportation and live next to people, you got to be in control of yourself, right? There's a certain sort of social contracts you make if you're going to live together in cities. And we elect people to uphold those, right? That value those.
Well, we should. I guess we don't always, but yeah.
and law and order in our cities shouldn't be a political thing. It should be something that whatever party's in power, or Republican, Democrat, you feel like the laws, people are going to be policed, things like that. This sort of basic things, your ability to walk down the street, get on a train, and go to a destination, next train stop, should not be something that inherently you're risking your life to do. It should be something that doesn't raise your heart rate at all, right? And you're paying money for that. You're paying taxes for that.
Yeah.
And you're choosing, but lately it's sort of become the elites. And I think criminal justice reform started out as a Republican thing. Speaker Ryan, it was a big thing for him to try to do some criminal justice reform.
Yeah.
And the Democrats were like, whoa, we don't want the Republicans to have it. So we want to take over this issue and go even farther with it. And so you saw George Soros got on and started promoting, especially in cities that are already heavily Democratic, like Los Angeles or San Francisco, Chicago, to have district attorneys or other people in charge of law enforcement run for office that would be very, very liberal. Excuse me. And so there was like, oh, well, if the Republicans are open to that, we'll just take over the issue and go as far as we think we can, because it's sort of like the Republicans are giving us an inch, let's take a mile. And, so you got sort of things like this cashless bail, and then you got these reactions like defund the police when there was, any negative story about the police reported in the media.
Yeah.
And so now the climate is felt, especially by people on the right, that we can't trust the left to govern, right? If they're defunding the police, the things like this have sort of undermined that basic sort of trust of whoever's in power. Certain basic things are going to be agreed upon, or there's going to be a sort of sameness. Maybe they'll be a little kinder hearted, maybe they'll be a little stricter, kind of ebb and flow, but there'll be a certain basis, and that feels undermined. And I feel like that's dangerous in America in our social contract, because we need an an opposition party that's credible, right? That we feel like
Yeah.
has the ability to govern, and not just domestically, but also foreign. That our foreign partners need to have trust that whoever's in power, whichever party's in power, certain things are going to be stable. Sort of like through the Cold War, they knew whether it was Kennedy or Eisenhower, Nixon, Johnson, Reagan, the nuclear deterrent that whoever was going to launch missiles against Russia, if they ever launched missiles at us, right? There were certain things certain policies that were maintained across political lines. And now it feels like some of those have been eroded.
Well,
Where
well, so look, it's like when, it was centrist, right? And everybody was kind of in the center. It was center left or center right. And, in the 1920s and 30s, like there was like a credible communist presence in the United States, and then they totally, thanks to Stalin, I guess, totally lost credit in the United States, except for real hardcore people. And then there was the 60s kind of new cultural left, and but that was always that was always an educated class that was going to move on into power, holding power, in universities and the government and whatever corporations, and then so there's the left, as we understand it, has never truly been a European kind of socialist left. This socialism and communism were very strong. Even in France, they felt like it was a bulwark against the fascism that has and I mean, even as far as the UK, although less so for various reasons, but it just never, the left, what we called the left, was not really ever a left, capital L left. It was the center left, and you could even argue that for most of its history, in the 20th century anyway, the U.S. government has been kind of center right even, and so and so yeah, that's changing. People are calling things like that into question. And I for me, so I'll just say from a theoretical standpoint, that's really interesting, because I really enjoyed. I studied Foucault, and I studied Derrida, and I studied whatever the Adorno and stuff like that, the darlings of the theorists of the left, and those are very interesting ideas to me. And I think I'll just say, as a non-professional, non-academic, those, I think they're totally misapplied, those ideas. And I think I think for whatever reason, the way that they've been sort of married also to this Ibram X. Kendi kind of stuff, it just took a really weird direction that I would not, studying those theories in graduate school, I would never have, they're theories, they're not proven in any way. And it's just Foucault is if you have a center of power, that it's basically antinomianism. You always have to tear it down. So this is what I feel the left these days is missing, that when they take power, or whenever they think they've taken power, which I would argue they've, during the Biden administration especially, a lot of them were in power, and then they have to be torn down, because you constantly have to tear it down. You constantly have to tear down the centers of power, and according to Foucault. And so this is where I'm are you guys really trying to do this? Are you you're making Foucault a household word? Do you really want to do that?
Yeah, Portland definitely wanted to, right? Portland Oregon.
But it's like they know they are going to have to be like, it's like a law of nature. You have to be torn down if you make it into power, then you've got to be torn down. It's just really weird. I have to say, like the left that like I was part of, like some of these ideas were there, but it was never not liberal. And so it was just like more like, let's make the table bigger. That was really like the left I was part of. It was like bigger table, more people at the table. And
when you say
left,
liberal,
like,
you mean like classical Western liberalism, where we still have elections and we still have
exactly. Thank you. Yeah, for clarifying. Right. I mean like classical liberalism, yes, and not like liberal as in left. And so it was like bigger table, more people at the table. Let's hear from everybody. It wasn't like there's only so much room at the table. The room it can only be so big, and so like here's how we choose who gets to sit at the table. Like that doesn't make sense to me, because that is really just the same thing as like what really like white supremacy, except turned on its head. So why is that better? Like that's my feeling about it.
Yeah, and we would. I will say one of my favorite theories of yours was, why don't we all just go back to horses? We don't need cars anymore. That was one of my favorite leftist / conservative ideas.
So here, I'll explain that a little more.
That was just a joke.
No. I will explain it. I will explain it. I stand by it. Okay, so like what makes the world go round? Money. Money makes the world go round, right? So like everything, our economy, like absolutely 100% depends on there being ever more greater supplies of money, like ever more things becoming part of the economy, like women becoming part of the economy. Like we've like, made laws so kids cannot become part of the economy except as consumers. And then like, now like here we are like monetizing hopefully you're monetizing like your thoughts or whatever. You didn't have a show on CNN, but now you've got one on YouTube. And so like ever more things becoming part of the economy grows. And so like we constantly have to make choices along the way. Do we remain impoverished by not growing the economy? Like, right, but that is a choice. And so it's like when you make a trade, you have one value and you have another value, and you have to choose between them. And we usually choose more convenience, better living, things like that. And so yes, but anyway, no, I'm not. I wouldn't really advocate we go back to horses.
Chapel Hill. It's funny, Chapel Hill and like Palo Alto, which I would say are two college towns that are very elitist.
We're going back to horses.
Well, they want zero job growth because they don't want to change the nature of their town. It's sort of a conservatism. They don't want to have high density housing or become a big city. They still want to stay where they've always sort of been.
As a former resident of Chapel Hill, I 100% agree with that. Yeah, they're very conservative, but they call it progressivism. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Everybody would, they would rather die than vote Republican. But all right, so I want to transition. So one of the things in one of my core principles that I've talked about on Common Mansplaining, I feel like there's a time and place for liberal policy, and a time and place for conservative policy. I generally think that at the federal level or the nationwide level, shall we say, should be more conservative and have a lighter touch. Should only be concerned with the constitutional things about that only the federal government can do, sort of military safety, fighting interstate corruption, post office, and just kind of creating a system where prosperity can take place. And if there's a place for liberal policy, like government intervention to fill something, it should be done either at a state, county, city, community. The smaller the better, to respond to a social need, a social problem, and if there's not a need for it, to pull it back. Now, in our history, we talked about the history. Obviously, in the 30s, there was a need for the government to expand. Right, the government was way too small, and so they elected FDR, and he started expanding the government, and it kind of became a both side thing, because Truman expanded the government, Eisenhower expanded the government, Kennedy expanded the government, Johnson
Yeah, it's
expanded
just
the
a
government.
different theory about what government was doing.
Nixon was a big progressive, wanted to have universal health care, but was expanded the government. Carter expanded the government until finally we got to Ronald Reagan, and there was this swing. It's like, okay, just because we needed some expansion doesn't mean that we always need federal expansion, and starting to push back on that idea. And even Clinton was famous for saying the era of big government is over, right? That there was sort of a shared consensus now that the federal government didn't need to endlessly grow in size and scope and things like that. And there's a time for liberal policy. What we've seen now, right? And I think by and large, the country feels like that when the Democrats were sort of centrist on national level, they were taken seriously as a party. And the Republicans are, when the Democrats under Biden, right, because he was asleep at the switch. So whoever was running the country under Biden's administration, right, was so far left, right, they would deport nobody, right. There was they kind of lost credibility of they would sort of have this center left, position going to the far left. But now we're seeing cities are sort of the next battleground. Trump has I'm interested in your thoughts on Washington, D.C. So Trump said, Washington, D.C., a place where you had authority, shouldn't be this violent. You shouldn't have an expectation of, walking down the street at night in D.C. on the east part of town, not the west part of town, of you being a potential victim of a crime. So he made some steps, and that shouldn't have been controversial. But the reactions were that he was being called a dictator, a fascist, an authoritarian for just enforcing the laws on the books in a way that he had authority to, but for the benefit of the common people. This is not something for the elites, right? The elites all live in Georgetown. They live in the nice parts of town anyways. But the common people who live in these rougher parts of town felt like it greatly benefited them. They really appreciated the presence. And this is sort of one of the disconnects I want to see, is that sometimes policy that you're talking about, like, let's try some of Foucault's crazy ideas. The elites are protected from that. They have a two-tiered, right? Their life is so different from the common people, right? That where they live, their budgets, their lifestyle is so different. So they're like, sure, they sort of feel invincible. That, well, that didn't work. It doesn't bother. Well, at least we tried. At least we had good intentions. We're trying to do something good for our fellow men. But as elites, that they're sort of protected in it. And that type of elitism, I feel like, is the most dangerous in alienating the common people from the government, from feeling that the government understands them, treats them fairly, treats them equally. If they feel like the government's just for elites, and that any type of policy that they're having to endure is not something, is not in their benefit and is done for either ideological or just theoretical reasons. So what would you say to that?
Okay. Right. So I guess that's a hard question, I'll say honestly, because I read a book recently. It's called Morning After the Revolution. It was written by Nellie Bowles, who is the wife of the person who started the Free Press, and I can't remember her name right now. But she wrote this book, and so they live in Los Angeles, she and her wife, and one of the chapters of the book described how they have to pay, I think, something like $1,000 or $2,000 a month for private security, because they cannot expect the Los Angeles Police Department to respond to them within any reasonable amount of time. And so they said their car got stolen, I think, and they called the Los Angeles Police Department. It took 2 hours for the police department to show up, and and so they pay for private security, and they can because they make the kind of money where they can pay $20,000 a year or whatever for private security, and so she was very critical of this, and so she's like heterodox. They're heterodox, like what what you would call like former leftists who have been red pilled, I guess.
Yes.
And so they were like, this is terrible. Los Angeles decided, and so really what it turns into is an idea that seemed progressive and left turned into like a very libertarian idea of like every man for himself. We are not going to fund the Los Angeles Police Department, so you have to pay privately for your own security, and not everyone can do that. And so anyone who can't do that, if I was living in Los Angeles, like I wouldn't be able to afford 20,000. I mean, maybe I'd have that kind of job, but probably not. Like that kind of, or Washington D.C. I couldn't like have myself surrounded by Secret Service or whatever. And so I think it's an idea that the real repercussions haven't been thought about, like who does it actually affect. I really like it's one of the things like where you see poll after poll where like all people, like everyone poor or rich or like black or white or Hispanic or whatever, everybody's like, yes, please, policing. We want policing, and it's like
it should be nonpartisan.
Yeah, I guess but like then again, it should be nonpartisan, and the argument against it is that it's always partisan.
Yeah.
So
well, it should be something. The degrees, like whether we police or not, should be nonpartisan. The degrees and the nature of whether we have stop and frisk or whether we have so the degrees might vary, but whether or not like we're going to come and investigate a crime that's been committed against you shouldn't be a partisan issue. If somebody steals or assaults you or commits a crime against you, you should feel like they're going to put some resources into trying to solve that crime or do something about it.
Yeah, so like I'll tell you about when I went to New York. I went there in high school in the in the 90s. I'll just say I already said how old I was. So I went in the 90s, and it was a school trip, and I remember all the parents talking about how seedy New York had been, and they would never have allowed us to do that, like on a school trip, like and this was like Giuliani or post Giuliani or something like that. And Giuliani's thing was the broken windows theory of policing and the stop and frisk, and so like Broadway was booming, and like we high school kids, it was just like Disney World for us and stuff like that. And so the result of it was that New York went from like it was like sometime in the late 70s when they wrote that headline that was like Uncle Sam to NYC drop dead, because like they were asking the U.S. government for money, and the U.S. government was like, no, figure it out yourself. And so it went from that like just rock bottom in the 70s to like Disney World by the 90s. And it was because of things like that. So like New York just did wonderfully well financially, but then they were like, well, who are the police targeting? So now there's like the backlash against that. Like, well, who are the police targeting? Well, is this fair? Like, is it fair like that? Like, it's happening in these neighborhoods all the time. And so like these are the questions, and so like we see the current kind of situation with the politics in New York, and people move out, and businesses move out eventually, and it's like a cycle, and it's really like when you're looking at like statistics, and when you're looking at polls, and when you're looking at aggregates and stuff like that, it is really hard to say like it will or won't affect you or your neighbor this way. And you might see some up and you might see some down, and that's like, I guess, like when we go off of let's just say like we had this like kind of center right consensus for a while, And when you move away from that and you try to introduce something else, it's creating like a bit of chaos in the system. And we have to like see how it all comes out right now. And like where it's coming out is it's going to benefit some people, but not others, I guess.
Yeah. I think part of the theory, it's a little bit of wishful thinking. It's like, well, look how gentle Finland in Helsinki treats their criminals, or they don't do this in Helsinki. Let's try that in New York City, which is a very different, city with a different culture, different dynamics, and different things like that. And it feels like let's just try something, and we shouldn't be trying things in the biggest, most important city in the world. You try things in smaller areas and get them up. But what I think the real reason is that the pro-social aspect that you experience by policing, by having an expectation of that crimes would be investigated, right? That we would drove down criminal behavior and made it safer for people to attend. And that safety, that social environment that creates what a prosperity. People feel like they can do business, that they can transact, they can participate in the community in a way that's safe, and that prosperity comes in. It's very easy though, and leftists maybe feel like that bubble or that thing is strong enough to withstand them degrading the very foundation of it. But as soon as you stop stopping and frisking or stop doing these things at a high level, now the criminal element feels emboldened to walk around with guns when before they wouldn't, because they're like, I might be stop and frisk. So they leave their gun at home. So now before you'd have fewer guns on the street, which is much less risk for you getting shot. But without stop and frisk, because of ideological reasons, now there are more guns being on the street because they feel safer, they're less likely to be caught, kind of thing. And people know this, the common people know this, and they intuitively know it's become less dangerous, and they pull back. They're social, they don't interact, and the prosperity decreases, and then they want to flee those neighborhoods. They say, like, look, this isn't some great social experiment or cultural expression I'm having here. I just want to live in peace with my family and go about, and they've been coming here to North Carolina in droves, right? We've all experienced lots of
people vote with their feet. Yeah, that's what I've been saying a lot. People are voting with their feet.
So one of the things is it's talking about we would like the left to be taken seriously, right? To be we can say that they're serious about governance. Maybe they have different lines that they want to do or different priorities. They want to spend money differently. But that certain core social expectations that we expect government to provide, that can be provided by us, that we want you to do the firefighting and the policing and dig the sewers and where we sort of maintain these functions when we live together in groups. Those type of actions, when they're not taken seriously, kind of degrades, right, our ability to trust them, right? It feels like that they're more motivated by virtue signaling. And this brings us to next topic. And I know this is one you want to talk about the least, but it's foreign policy now. We talked a little bit about
what foreign policy? I'm an American. I don't even believe there's other countries outside of this one.
But there are countries who feel whose foreign policy is governed rather by virtue signaling, or these Foucault sort of, hey, let's try these ideas rather than tried and true things and act irresponsibly. And one of the things that's more recently in the news is that Great Britain, France, Canada, and Australia all just decided unilaterally to recognize Palestine. And without any effect of what that action would have, just that they could feel righteous in themselves, that they don't condone all of Netanyahu's behavior in the war in Gaza, and that they're, by recognizing Gaza or recognizing Palestine as a state, now they're righteous. It's very, very short-sighted, and it's something that felt like if there were adults in the room, they could explain to them why. what do you think the effect of this type of when governments, states start acting like this way with each other, when virtue signaling becomes more important than sort of sound policy? What does it undermine?
Um,
Well, your
well,
comment
okay.
on their recognizing Palestine.
Yeah,
You told me before. Well, they were recognized in
1947. Yeah.
1947. Yeah.
Yeah, the 1947 resolution in the UN was originally for Israel and Palestine to have side-by-side states. And so Israel said, sure, let's do it. We'll take whatever we can get. They got they got a pretty small piece of what has been historically called Israel, and a pretty small piece of what biblically was called Israel. But they were like, you know what, we'll take it. Yeah, and so the Palestinian cause, the Arab nations abstained from voting. So the resolution passed as it was, which was for Israel to have, a certain amount of land for the state.
A homeland. Yeah.
And so then the next day, 6 Arab nations declared war on Israel the day after they declared independence from the British mandate. And there's way more history to that. I mean, there's like the Ottoman Empire suddenly collapsing and all that. But so in a certain way, like, it's not controversial to be like oh, well, let's have a Palestinian state. So I feel like this current hullabaloo about it is like old hat. It's like, sure, let's just there was a UN resolution, Israel and Palestine side by side, let's do it. And there's a lot of Palestinians living in Jordan, living in Egypt, and so in some ways Jordan had control of the West Bank until 1967 when they ceded it. They left the territory after the 6-Day War and stuff that Israel won against them and all that. And so there's a lot of actual historical things that just don't surface in the current movement for Palestine. And so I would just say about the governments right now. And it's funny, today I was reading about the Afghan Women's Project, the Afghan Women Writers Project, and this was something that was in 2013, a book I was reading that was written in 2013. In 2013, the U.S. was, intending and attempting to replace the Taliban as the rulers of Afghanistan, and then we know what happened. It was disastrous. And the very next day, the Taliban took back over, and nobody's talking about Afghan women anymore. But the United States was trying to do an actual thing. Recognizing a state on paper is not an actual thing. It's virtue
one of the things, right?
Yeah.
Because the opposition party to the Taliban weren't serious about governing. They were, right. It's like, we know the Taliban are bad, but there's not really an alternative that was a good, solid, party to turn power over to. They couldn't maintain power. Everybody hated them as well, right? And this is part of the thing too. I would like to trust, and I think people like to trust America, that if you make an agreement, and then with Donald Trump or with the Republican president, Republican administration, and then an election comes in and Democrats elected, that there will still be some stability, that those agreements will still sort of be enforced. And I feel like that trust is eroded because the left, or Biden, is so far different from where the Republicans want to govern right now, and I feel like that weakens us. But I also feel like the controversy with Palestine is because the only government that you can set up diplomatic relations with is Hamas. And they're an illegitimate terrorist organization, but the only ones who who even claim to provide any type of government services. And so it's an unserious resolution, and one that's just meant to pressure and feels anti-Israel, just because right now it feels more politically, they gain more political power, more votes by being anti-Israel and supporting than it does for supporting sound policy. And that's a very cynical thing to say, but that's what it looks like for the common man. And
I wish that people would talk about like liberating the Palestinians from Hamas. I really wish like there was somebody saying like, hey, guess what? There's a terrorist organization that is like ruling over Gaza right now, or something like that. Like they deserve a decent government. Like, how about that? Like that just the whole like conversation of like being pro Hamas. Like that's so crazy to me. That's so crazy.
Yeah, it is. So this is all the time we've run out. But any closing statements? Anything that you've said? Any last ideas? This obviously we can't talk about everything. We've kind of talked about the two-tier system, but do we feel like that people now? Is there a way for the common man to push back against elite agendas, or is this something that we can only really do? Right. This is why people are turning to President Trump or somebody who's oafish or belligerent, especially with elites, feel like they're the only way that the common man can get through to elites, right? That they're completely dismissed as sort of the lower classes. Is there a way that a person of quiet dignity, a leader, can emerge and have and stand up to this sort of two-tiered system that we're experiencing?
Time will tell.
Time will tell.
I wish I knew. No, I honestly think like our system has held up pretty well against a lot of different threats. We've definitely had like threats of authoritarianism before. We've had threats of just like one-sided government, one-party governments or whatever. And it's like it takes time, but like usually like our institutions hold up. So that's what I'm crossing my fingers for. I think like really the landscape has just changed so much with social media that this is something we now have to work into the equation. Like how do we operate in this landscape now? So like I'm not on social media, so like so that's my solution.
Get on X and start reading on X.
But I don't want to. It's just gonna make me mad.
Well, right, and I think this is part of the thing. People can't we can't put our heads in the sand anymore, because these things will drill down and affect the common people. It's not just, and that's part of the thing that we want to hear here. It's not just. Even though we are not elites, we're not in power, we're not affecting policy, we are affected by it, and we can still have opinions and intelligent thoughts about it. And appreciate you so much for coming on and sharing your ideas and your experience.
Thank you.
And your perspective. And everybody out there, please like and subscribe and share and watch any of our other comments. And we do this every Wednesday and Saturday. And we'll see you next time on Common Mansplaining. Keep it common
out there.
Right.